Hey guys, we are going to implement multi-part download. But before that, we need to understand how multi-part download and upload works. So first, let's take a look here. We have a very large file. The first thing that we need to do is to break the large file into small chunks or parts. After that, we start downloading the chunks concurrently. We download the first one, we succeed, we download the second one, also we download the third one, we got an error. So here in this case, we are going to retry in case of failure. So let's suppose that we are retrying. Okay, now we succeed. And then we download the last part. So after downloading all chunks or parts, we gather them together into a single file. So now we are going to have here our large file in our directory. So as you can see, we are using AWS S3. So in order to implement such use case, we are going to use CRT S3 client. CRT stands for AWS Common Runtime. So before moving further, let me introduce you Transfer Manager. So we are going to combine CRT based S3 client with Amazon S3 Transfer Manager. So Transfer Manager is a high-level utility in AWS SDK. So it's amazing because it uses multi-part upload and multi-part downloads to perform concurrent transfer, which, as we can see, improves the performance. And also it's amazing because it offers us a mean to monitor the transfer progress in real time. And the last but not least, it also offers pause and resume. So this is amazing because it provides us flexibility when we are managing long-running operation. We can pause and we can resume the transfer that we are dealing with. So this is the C4 diagram of our application. This is a very simple application, Spring Batch job that contains two steps. The first step is using, for example, the CRT and Transfer Manager in order to download the file. So this is the part that we are going to download the file using the multi-part download. So remember, you can use this approach for your microservice. It should not be only Spring Batch. You can use it in any Spring Boot application. And then we are going to monitor the system. So for example, we are going to track the execution and the performance of our step, okay? And in the future, we can, for example, use Prometheus and Grafana in order to visualize it in a very nice Grafana dashboard. And later, we are going to process each record, okay, in chunk mode. We are going to process each record of our file, and then we are going to save it into a database. Yeah, I know, guys. Talk is cheap. Show me the code. I want to see the code. I want to see the code. Okay, guys, before that, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Please support this channel. And now, let's jump to the code, guys. Let's go. So first thing first, I have just created here a new project. This is a Spring Boot project. The name is Multipart Download, which is the title of this video. And here is the place that we are now going to use some more dependencies. So the first one should be the Spring Cloud dependency. So I'm just going to copy from our previous video, okay, and I will paste it here. So let me just first delete here all this information. I think we don't need it right now, but for now, let me just paste it here. So this is the Spring Cloud dependency. Why we need Spring Cloud dependency? Because we are going to use Spring Cloud AWS dependency. So in here, I'm just gonna paste here the dependency management. So as we can see here, we have the Spring Cloud AWS dependencies. So the next dependency that we are going to paste it here are the dependencies for multi-part download. So in that order, let's paste them here. So here we have the Spring Cloud AWS starter for S3. And also we have the CRT dependency as well as S3 Transfer Manager. These are the dependencies that we really need in order to implement our use case. So in order to move further, we need to actually use the S3, right? So in that order, the first thing that we need to do is, for example, going to your AWS account and start using, for example, the S3 in order to get the credentials, right? But here is the point. So in order to start using S3, even if it's free, okay, even if you can use it for free, you still need to verify your credit card. And for example, we just need to test it, right? So there is no need to do that. So in that order, I am using an alternative, which is MinIO. MinIO is very nice. It's also object storage. So we can use the same code, okay, in our Spring Boot application or in our Spring Batch application or in our microservice. And the same code will work with MinIO or even AWS S3. That's the reason we are going to use MinIO in order to simulate S3, okay? But it's the same. So MinIO is amazing. It's very simple to use and you can use it in production. As you can see here, just read a little bit more documentation and you will be amazed. But I'm not telling that the S3 is not good, okay? I'm just telling you guys that if we want to start developing our application, we don't need to start verifying our card, okay? Our credit card. So that's the reason that we are going to use MinIO. So we need to go back to our IntelliJ. So in order to use MinIO, we will need Docker. So I hope that you have Docker installed. So let me just paste it here. This is my Docker Compose. So we are going to have here some images. So we have the Postgres, which will be our database because Spring Batch, it needs a database. Of course, we have the in-memory resource, but we need a database and we are going to use Postgres in order to store the metadata related to our batch application. And also we will need MinIO, which will be our object storage. If you want to understand a little bit more about object storage and the different vendors that we have in the market, just go to our previous video and you will understand better. Now let's start creating our project structure. So here, let's just create a package and let's call it by service in order to serve the same purpose for example, Spring Batch and Spring Boot application following, for example, layered architecture. So now moving to presentation mode. Here, let's just create, for example, we will not use, for example, the interface and so on. You can refactor it later, okay? So now let's go. Let's create here a new class. Let's call it by custom S3 client. So this class will be a component because we will inject it later. So for now, let's just use here required. So required. In that order, let's add here another dependency. So first, let's add here a new dependency. Let's just add the Lombok dependency. And now also we need, for example, the plugins that will use the Mapstruct and Lombok annotation processor. So in that order, let's go here. We can just remove this one here and let's paste it here. So here what we have, so we have the plugins for annotation processor paths, the Lombok, okay, and the Lombok Mapstruct binding. Now let's go back to our custom S3 client. Let's try to inject it. So let's just see constructor. I have here a typo. Require args constructor, just like this. So having here our require args constructor, this will help us to inject the S3 dependencies, right? So in that order, the first thing that we are going to use the S3 template provided by Spring Cloud AWS. So just like that. And the next thing that we are going to use here, okay, will be the transfer manager. So in that order, let's just use here S3 transfer manager, just like this. Now going back to our C4 diagram, we will see that the first thing that we are going to do is we are going to download the file, right? So we are going to list the file, we are going to download the file, we are going to share the file path with our Spring Boot or Spring Batch application in order to get the file that we have just downloaded. Now let's go to the code and let's implement all the 3 steps. So back here on our IntelliJ, so the first thing that we are going to do is to create our method that will download the file and will return the file path. So now let's create here our method. Our method will return an optional, let's say path, just like that, and let's call it by download file. So it will just receive a bucket name. Okay, we just need the bucket name here. So maybe we can, for example, start adding here assertion. So yeah, that's okay. Now the next thing that we need to do, we are going to use the, let's say we are going to use the S3 template, okay, in order to list the file. So first we are going to filter, we are going to see if there is any file in the bucket in order to download it. Okay, so the concept of S3 template, right? So we have here S3 template. So S3 template follows the same concept as, for example, templates in Spring. So for example, we have the famous REST template, we have the JDBC template, we have the Kafka template, JMS template, and so on. So they are amazing and they are designed to simplify, okay, to remove the boilerplate code for all the common, let's say, operations. Okay, now when we use, for example, the list method will allow us to list all the files, okay, all files or objects that we have in our bucket, and it's using the list objects v2. Okay, so we are using the latest or the newer version from AWS SDK. So as we can see, in order to list our objects, we will need a bucket and a prefix. So in that order, let's use here our bucket. So let's add the bucket here. Let's pass the bucket as argument. And in terms of prefix, we could, for example, only process or look for files from 2025. Okay, so the more recent files. So these return as a stream. So here, as we have the stream, let's just see what we can do here. So we have the stream, so let's just find any or find first, and then we can, for example, start working with the result. So the result will be a S3 resource. So as we don't want to expand it like that, okay, so we will be back. What we are going to do here is let's create here another method, okay, that will actually transfer, okay, the file. So let's just call it by file transfer, just like that, and we are going to pass here, for example, the bucket name, and also we are going to pass here the S3 resource. I think we can just, for example, rename this method, okay, in order to be better. So transfer file is better. And yeah, now the first thing that we can do here is let's rename also this one. It's not file name, but it's a S3 resource. This is a S3 resource. So yeah, now the first thing that we need to do, we need to create here our path. So in that order, let's use the path of, and then let's get the file name from the S3 resource. So we can call it by, for example, path destination. So this is the destination, okay? This will be the path where we are going to save our file that we are downloading, okay? So after having that, I think this is the time that we can start, for example, downloading the file itself. In that order, when we are using, for example, the S3 transfer manager, we need to create the download file request, okay? We need to create the proper request in order to download the file. Now, let's create here our download file request. So just like that, so download file request, that builder, okay? And here we can start, for example, building our download file request by using, for example, the get request. So in order to have the get request, we can just use it like that. For example, here the request will be, so the request will receive a bucket. Okay, so we pass here our bucket name, and then, for example, we pass also the key. So the key actually will be the file name that we are getting, okay, from our S3 resource. Now, the next thing that we need to do is to add a destination, right? So in that order, let's give the path. Destination is the place that we are going to save our file. And I think, yeah, we can add also the transfer listener, which, for example, will be for now the login transfer listener. Okay, so this will show us the progress of our download. Okay, the progress while we are downloading the file. Okay, if we take a look here, for example, and we read a little, and we read a bit the documentation. Okay, this will be what we are going to see in terms of progress. Now that we have it, let's just call the build method. And now let's do auto completion. So yeah, now that we have here our download file request, this is the time that we need to use the S3 transfer manager. So the S3 transfer manager, you can just go to our another video where we talk about the multi-part upload. Now we are talking about the multi-part download, but the S3 transfer manager is amazing. Okay, just read a little bit more the documentation and you will understand. We can, for example, set the minimum part size in bytes, okay, and so on. We will see it in later on. So let's go back here. Let's use the S3 transfer manager in order to download the file. So S3 transfer manager, and then we call the download. Okay, but before leaving it like that, we need to specify the completion future, because this is a sync operation, right? So after completing, for example, we can just call the join method. So before, for example, leaving it, let's just use here the log that, for example, info, and we can say, for example, file, so downloaded successfully. And then we can say also typo here, and we can say from bucket, and we also specify here the name of the bucket. Okay, so in that order, let's just use here. So it will be S3 resource. So S3 resource that let's get file name. Okay, so just like that, and here we specify the bucket itself. Just like that. So we are just logging. Okay, so we don't have logging that info. In order to have the login here, we can just go here and use the Lombok annotation server4j that will provide the log for us. Now, in order to finish this method here, we can just return the path destination. So guys, this is very simple. We just prepare our path destination, so we will just download it here on our project, but of course you can specify from your local folder or somewhere else. Now let's just call it here. So for example, so we have here list, we find the first file. This is just an example, guys. Maybe in the future we will see how to do it better. For example, polling our S3 directory, or start running our Spring Batch application once a file arrives in the bucket. It will be amazing also. We can do that, guys. But leave a like, leave a comment in order to motivate me to do it. Okay, now here let's just use here the transfer file, and here we can pass, for example, the bucket name, which is this one here, and also the S3 resource. So now that we have here the code that will allow our application to download files from our AWS S3 bucket, or even min.io bucket, or any kind of object storage bucket, we need to make the infrastructure configuration, right? So in that order, let's use here the configurations from Spring Cloud AWS. So here we can say, okay, the S3 that endpoint, we specify the endpoint. Yeah, so this is the endpoint. The next thing that we need to do is also, for example, start providing the access key and the secret key. So we can also provide, for example, the region. Okay, if you understand that you can deploy your AWS S3 multi-region. So in that order, let's just use here the S3, that region. I am in Portugal, so it will be the region Europe South 2. And also, for example, I think we can, it's not official, but we can use, for example, here Spring Cloud, let's say AWS that, for example, S3 that bucket. Okay, this is just our custom property. So this is what we have. Now we need to go to our AWS account, or if you don't have an AWS account, you can just use the min.io, okay, that is running already on my machine. So we can just go there and start getting the credentials. So as I have, for example, min.io running on my machine. So in that order, let me just go back to my browser. And if you take a look here, this is the credentials. So admin. So just like that. As we can see, we have here a bucket. So in that order, we are going to use this bucket here. But for your use case, guys, just go to our previous video where we talk about the multi-part upload, okay? And you will understand how you can create the bucket. But it's very simple, guys. So in that order, going back here, for example, so going back here, we can add here the bucket name will be sales info, just like this. So this is the bucket, and here in our bucket, for example, we can browse and we will see some files, okay, some very old files that we use in our previous videos long time ago, guys. So they are still valid. Now we need the access key and the secret key. So in that order, you just go here, for example, and you can, for example, create or change, right? So let's just create here some new one. But remember, you need to copy, okay, them. So let's just create. So you need to copy. This is the access key. So let's just paste it here. And here we have the secret key. So just like that. So this is what we need in order to make our application to connect to the AWS S3 object storage. In our case, we are using min.io. So now let's go back here. So now that our application is able to connect to the object storage, I think we need to start, for example, building what we actually need to do. So let's just create here a new package. So this package will be a package that will contain our task, the task that we will use in case of, for example, Spring Batch application. So for example, in your case, if you are using microservice, you can just inject, right, this class here and call the method, right? But in our case, as we are using Spring Batch, I'm just going to create here a new task here, download file, okay, task, just like that, and it will be a component, a Spring component. Of course, we are going to inject some other beans. We are going to log also. So what we need to do, we need to provide a min, okay, that will allow this class to be a Spring Batch task. So in that order, let's implement the tasklet interface and let's override the methods. So this is what we have. Let me just put it here in order to make it better in terms of visibility. Let's just call our class, this class here, the custom client, the custom S3 client, in order to download the file. So let's just go here, let's inject it via constructor injection, and let's call the custom S3 client, just like that. And here, for example, we can, okay, call it just like this. So download the file. It needs a bucket. So in that order, let's just use here the string, and let's say here bucket name. So bucket name, just like that. Let's use here at value, guys. This is very simple Spring, okay? And the value we will get here, right? So this one here. So this is how we can get, right, the bucket name. So just like this, and here we can pass the bucket name as argument. That will be okay. So let's just call it here file path, or even let's call it by downloads, okay, file path, just like that. So now the question here is, if it was a microservice or any other kind of application, it will be very easy, right, to deal that. But in order to make it, let's say, in order to share this path with Spring Batch, because we will read the content of the file. So how we can, for example, pass or share the input file, okay, this file path, with the Spring Batch application. So this is the place that we are just going to use. For example, here, for example, I think we don't need if, because it's an optional already. Let's just rename it to be optional, for example, optional, okay, download file. So here we can use the optional download file if present, okay, if present. Now we need to use, for example, here the chunk context. Guys, we have a lot of videos related to Spring Batch, and you need to watch them, okay? So we go to chunk context, then we go to step execution context, okay? Then we go to the job itself. Of course, there are different ways to do that, okay? But let's just use it like that. And here in the execution context of our job, we can, for example, put here, let's say, a key, okay? So the key can be, for example, input that file that path, just like that, and then we pass, okay, the file path. But instead of only passing the path itself, okay, we need to add it, for example, to absolute path, because we need all path, and let's use toString method, okay, just like that. So after that, we need to, for example, as we are here in this method, okay, this lambda expression, we can, for example, just return, okay, we can just, for example, okay, let me see here. So we are doing it like this, okay. Why we don't need it like that, okay? So it will just be like this, okay. And yes, so this is very simple. And then we can, for example, here, instead of return null, let's return finished, okay? So repeat status finished. Guys, we have videos related to that, the basics, okay? I think that's all that we need. So we have here our first task. Now let's go back to our presentation, for example. Yes, so in our presentation, we will see that we have a tasklet, right? So the tasklet that will download the file. So this is what we have here. And in the description, we can see that it lists the files, download the file, and then share the path. So this is what we have. Now let's just create our Spring Batch job, that we have a step that will read, okay, from the shared file path, will process, and then we can persist in database, which is something very easy that we have some different kind of videos here on our channel. Now let's do that. Now we can go here, okay. So we have here this 2.1. Now we need just to create here a config file. I think, is it a config file? No, let's create here a new package. Let's call it by job. And here we can start creating our job. So the job can be, for example, import, okay. The name of our job will be sales info, okay, job, just like that. So as it a Spring Batch job, we just need to annotate it with a configuration class. Let's use also here the Lombok stuff that we will need in order to make it work. So how we can start that? We can start, for example, by creating our reader, right? So it will be a flat file item reader. Let's create our flat file item reader. So the first thing that we need, right? We need a reader. So in that order, let's use here. So for example, we are going to read a sales DTO. So why sales DTO? Let me first finish here. For example, flat file item reader as a method. Okay, so we need a DTO that will allow us to map the lines of our file into a Java object. In this class will be a record. So in that order, let's just go here. Let's just create here a record. Let's put it in a package called by DTO. So just like this. So let's just start creating here. I don't think that it will be string. So the first field of our class will be sales ID. So just like that. And then we can also use, for example, a long, and let's call it by product ID. Let me just create here some other fields. So these will be the fields of our sales DTO, and it's a Java record. Remember, if you are not using Java 21 or Java 17 or later, please create an immutable class. So here on our job is the place. I think DTO should be also outside. I think so. So just like this. So here is the place that we can, for example, start some fields for our flat file item reader. So just like this, new flat file item reader builder. So the first thing, as always, we need to give a name of our reader. Let's just call it by file reader. So the next thing we need also is a resource. So here is the twist. So how we are going to get the resource? So if you understand, guys, the first thing that we need to do when we are dealing, for example, with Spring Batch and passing and sharing the data between jobs and step, okay, we are sharing it here. So we have these, let's say this key here, right? So we went from our step, we went to our job, and we used the job execution context, and we put this key in our job execution context. So how we can access that key? So the first thing, we need to put our reader as job scope. Okay, so if you understand, there is step scope, job scope, and so on. So let's just create it as a bin in order to simplify it in dependency injection. So after having here a job scope, the next thing that we need to do, we are going to use Spring expression language. Okay, so here is the place that we need to use something like this, for example, and then where we are going to get the key, we are going to get the key, okay, in the job execution context. So in that order, we are going to move, so something like job execution context, because this is the place that we have the key itself. So let me just put it like this. So in job execution context, we need to get the key. So this is the key that we are getting there, okay? But in order to get the key, we need to add it like this. So we are specifying, so we are getting from the job execution context this key here. Where we put it, as I was showing you guys, okay, we have put it here. So we have job execution context, then we have execution context, and then we have the key. And now here on our job, we have this reader, which is a job scope, and we get the key just like that. So in that order, let's move further. Let's use here string, and let's call it by resource. So now what we need to do here, in this case, in terms of resource, we're just going to instantiate here a new file system resource, and here we paste the resource, and after that we can, for example, start adding, because our CSV, our file, will be a CSV file, okay, the file that we have on our bucket. So this file will be separated by the delimiter, okay, the separator will be this one here, okay, so semicolon, and yeah, now we can start adding, for example, names. So the names, if you follow the Spring Batch, okay, the names will be the same as we have here on our DTO. So in that order, let me just add the names. So now, after having it like that, so the next thing that we need to do is the target type. So here, when we say about, so here the reader should be like this. And here, for example, so the target type should be sale DTO, that class. So what does it mean? So we are mapping, okay? So all these fields, okay, will be mapped to sales DTO, okay? So after that, we can, for example, start skipping some lines. So for example, here we can add, for example, lines to skip. So we will just skip the first line, which is the header of our file. I will show you guys later. And then, for example, we can use, for example, let me just say the save state, for example, okay, so boolean that true, so something just like that. And let's just call the build. So here we still having this IntelliJ is complaining. Let me see. Okay, so my bad. When you use here the value, you should use the Spring, okay, this one here. So org Spring framework beans factory annotation. Okay, so this one here. Okay, now we have everything fine. So I don't like this like that, but I think this is the place. Yeah, we can find anything. So this is our reader, okay? So our reader is getting, okay, the file that we have just downloaded, okay? And then we shared here the file path. So now let's just go back here on our flat file item reader and let's try to understand this configuration here, okay? So this method here, save state, and we set it to true. So when we set the save state to true, Spring Batch saves the reader state. So for example, we are reading a file that contains 1,000,000 lines or 1,000,000 records. So we will read 1, 2, 3, 500, 600, and let's say that, for example, while we are reading, for example, the line 600, the job just fails. So when we read, for example, we set the save state to true, when we restart the job will restart from where it left off. So for example, in the line 600 instead of, for example, starting from the beginning. Okay, so that's the reason why we are using here the save state. It's amazing for job restartability. So here we have the reader. Now we need a place that we are going to write, where we are going to save all data that we just download this file and now we are reading, right? Now we are going to persist it. So we have a lot of writers in Spring Batch. So for today, we are going to use the JPA item writer. So in that order, let's just use here JPA item writer. So this is our DTO. So in order to write something that Spring Data JPA understands, we are going to create here a class. Let's call it by sales info. So this class actually will be, so we can just create it in the domain package. So here in the domain we will have this class, but it should be here, for example, okay, just like this. So we will have here the class in the domain, and here we are going to have all the properties. And remember, as it will be a class that Spring Data JPA understands, so we will need, for example, here, right, the entity. So this is different from a record, which is immutable. Here in this case, this is a mutable class. We can, for example, add getters and setters. For example, we can also add, for example, no arm constructor because the JPA needs it. And yeah, I think that's okay. So the first thing that we can add is the ID. So if you remember, the ID should be annotated with @ID, and also here we need to give the generate value strategy identity, but we can just set it auto. Okay, so the vendor will be determined. So now next fields, let's just add here, for example, if we take a look here, so it will be, let me just copy most of these fields, okay, because these are the fields that we will also persist. So in that order, let me just put them here. So private, just like that, and then we can, for example, replace, okay, all, let's say, of these. For example, let's just replace these with semicolon. So the first one is this, replace, 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 and here we have. So this will be our domain object, okay, our object that we will use in our, let's say, JPA item writer. So in that order, let's just say sales JPA writer, just like this. So we will not receive any argument here, and we can just, for example, create here, for example, let's use the entity manager factory because it needs the entity manager factory. Let's inject it here. So entity manager factory. Now that we have the entity manager factory, we can use it like this, and then we can set the build. So this will also be a bin, so just like that. So very simple, guys. We just have here our entity class, which will be a domain class, and then we just use the JPA item writer. Of course, we could use other item writer depending on our use case. For example, for me, always, okay, so JDBC batch item writer. So batch item writer is the one that I'm using most in production when I'm processing large. So if we need performance, we understand that JPA is not very nice. So the last thing, in order to make it better, so as we understand, we can start creating our step, right? So before that, I think we can start create first our step, okay? So let's create the step as we have already here, the task that will download the file. Next, we need to create a step that will read the file that we have just downloaded and write it to our database. So in that order, let's just create here, for example, public step, and here we can say, for example, from file downloaded to let's say DB, just like that, to DB. Guys, this is just an example. Always think about the naming convention. So now let's keep creating here our step. So if you remember, this is the latest version of Spring Batch. We are talking about Spring Batch version 5. This is what we have. So here we create it with step builder. So the step builder receives a name of the step and also the job repository. So where we get the job repository is very simple. We can just inject here job repository, just like that. So Spring Batch will offer a job repository. So now that we have it like this, we are going to say, okay, so we are going to receive the sales DTO, and then we are going to write, okay, the sales info. So this is the input and this is the output. So the input is the representation of our file. So that's the reason we are using the concept called by DTO, data transfer object. And the output will be sales info, which is just our domain object or our entity, okay? Now, we can use here the chunk. So this is the concept called by chunk processing. Remember, we have a very nice video related to chunk and tasklet, difference between both of them. So for example, for here, of course, the chunk size should be, you should understand when you should, what the chunk size you should use. But for example, we are just showing here the example, okay? Of course, you could put 1,000 or something like that, but it doesn't matter. So here, so we receive the chunk size, okay, and also we will receive the platform transaction manager. So in that order, let's just use here platform transaction manager. So let's just inject here, so the transaction manager, just like this, and then we can, for example, start creating our or setting our reader. So in terms of reader, as this is a, let's say, a bin, let's just use here just like this, okay? So here we can call the flat file item reader, and then we also need, for example, a processor. Why processor? Because, for example, when we write here, for example, when we set the writer, So our writer is receiving sales info, which is an entity, but our reader is receiving a file or is receiving a sales DTO. So we need to transform the sales DTO to sales info. We need to transform our DTO to a domain object. So where is the place? I think for this example, the best place to do that is by using here the processor. So processor is amazing in Spring Batch, where we can, for example, implement the business logic of our batch application, or when we get, or where we can, for example, do some transformation, some calculation, some enrichment, okay, some aggregation, and so on. So the processor is amazing, and we have a lot of videos related to processor. So as we are going to transform the sales DTO into sales info, I think we can create here a mapper. Yeah, guys, let's use the mapper here, and let's use the mapstruct. Okay, so here it will be just let's say sales mapper, so just like this. And now let's add here the dependency of mapstruct. I will just copy from our last video and I will paste it here, the version of mapstruct. So let me just paste it here. And the next one is the dependency of mapstruct, and let's paste it here. The last thing is here on our build section. So here in terms of configuration, okay, so configuration, we need annotation processor. As mapstruct is an annotation processor, we can just add it here, okay. And let's just reload and everything is okay. Now the next thing we need to start creating here our mapper. So we have different ways to create it, but for example, let's just use mapper. For example, if you want to use it as a Spring component, okay, you can just use here so here the component model, okay, you specify it Spring. So when you use it like that, so it will be a Spring bin. So now that we have it, so the last thing that I would like to add here, for example, is as we are mapping from our DTO, okay, we are going to map from our DTO. So first let's use here the mapper. So let's just say, okay, sales info, this is the output, okay, the return type, and let's say here map to entity, just like this, okay. And here, for example, if we need to specify, guys, if you understand mapstruct, right, if you need to specify the field, so you can just target, blah blah blah, source, and so on, guys, mapstruct is amazing. But one thing that I really like is, for example, to say if we have, for example, a mapped target, okay, property, we need to, for example, let's use here the report, we need to set an error, okay. So our application should stop if, for example, there is an unmapped target, okay, property. So this is what we have here. Now let's go back here on our application. So as we have here, I don't think that this is nice to use it as component model. I like to use it in different way, but anyways, so we can just, for example, inject it here. So it's sales mapper, so just like this, and here is the place that we can use the sales mapper that map to entity. So we are going to map the DTO to entity, and of course we can replace it with method reference. So after that, we can just call here the writer, so just like that. And yes, then we can, for example, call the build method. So this will be our step, the first step, okay. So we have just annotated as a bin. And yeah, so now let's create the step that will allow us to call this function here that downloads the file. So in that order, let's go back to our job config, okay, and here let's create a new step. Actually, this step will be a task step, okay. Let's just call it by download file, okay, step, just like this. And here we can, for example, return. So instead of return just like that, this step builder, let's return, okay, let's instantiate here the task, yes, the tasklet step builder. So this step will be a tasklet, guys. That's the difference between a let's say a chunk oriented and tasklet. So as we can see, in chunk we are doing something in chunk. Here, in case of task, what we will have here is just an operation, an atomic operation, for example, downloading the file. That's one of the best use cases that you can apply when you are using the tasklet. Download a file, clear directory, and drop table, execute something, okay? So that's the main motivation that we can understand, okay, when using the tasklet. So in that order, let's just here a step builder, of course, and the name, it will be download file step, okay, just like this. And also it will receive the job repository. Yes, so after receiving the job repository, we can now specify our task. So it will receive a task. So this is the place that we need to understand. If you remember, here in our, let's say here in our package, we have the task. So what is our task? Our task is download file task. As we can see, implements a tasklet, and it calls the custom S3 client, what we have done in the beginning of this video, okay? So that's amazing. And now let's go here, let's go back. So now let's inject first private final, what is the name of our task? Download file task. So just like that. First, let's see. Yes, we can inject because it's a Spring component. So here the tasklet will be download file task, and then it also use here transaction manager, okay, and then we can call here the method build, and now we can annotate it as a bin also. So now everything seems to make sense now. So first we have here download file. After downloading the file, we are going to call it from file downloaded to DB, where we have the reader, the processor, and the writer. So now we just need to create our job. Yes, so let's create our job. In order to create our job, it's very simple. So we're just going to say, okay, let's just call it by import sales. Let's just say sync sales job, just like that. Very nice name. And now here we can just return. As you understand, this is the new Spring batch, so it will be job builder. So just like this, let's just use here. So sync the name of our job, sync sales job. I think it's not a good name. So what it receives, it will receive also the job repository, and then we can, for example, add also, okay, the incrementer, run ID incrementer. Our job will have, so let's just call it as a flow. It will have a flow. So the first step that we are going to receive in this flow will be the download, okay, file step. So let's just put it here, and the next one will be this one here. So just like that. So our job will receive, okay, our job will receive two steps, and now the first one will be download. So after downloading, the next one will be so from file downloaded to DB, and then we can just say okay, and then we can call the build method just like this. And now here let's just use here at bin annotation, and yeah, that's the job that we have. Okay, so the job, the first step, the second step, and the second step contains these two, okay, configurations here. Now, in order to test our application, let's go back here on our application property. Now let's start configuring the data source, which is something that we already know how to do that. Everybody knows it. So the username will be root, so Spring that password will be also root, JDBC. So we are using PostgreSQL, yes, and the name of our database will be sales. Now we can use also, for example, here the strategy of our let's say JPA Hibernate DL. So let's say create, okay, because we don't know if this sales info exists. And after having that, let's go back here. Now the configuration of Spring Batch job enable is true, so the true is default. So what does it mean? So when we run our application, for example, running from here, the Spring Batch, okay, will start our job. So for example, if you are using a scheduler or a scheduled application that you need to run, for example, every 5 hours or every, I don't know, 5 seconds, okay, you can use it as false. But as it's default, okay, let's just leave it like this. The next thing that we can say is, for example, Spring Batch, okay, we need to specify the Spring Batch JDBC initialize schema always. So the next thing that we can do is, for example, going here, I have to edit my Docker Compose in order to use the version, the correct version, but I think you can, for example, just remove this in order to use the most recent version, okay, the latest version of Postgres. I have Postgres running on my machine. The next thing that you can do is, for example, going here and connect, okay, the new data source. So in that order, let me just go here, let's connect to the data source, and here we can just use, for example, root, okay, root as password. Let's test the connection. Okay, the connection is working fine. Okay, so we are here in this instance. Okay, this is the tables that we have from our previous videos related to microservice and shed lock. Amazing video, distributed lock. So just go there and watch it. So guys, if you are enjoying this session, please leave a comment, my guys. Please, I need it because I am really motivated, okay, showing you guys all the stuffs and playing with you guys with Spring and all these technologies. So the next thing that we can do before that, let's just go to our browser. So let's just go here on our browser. So let's take a look here. So for example, let's go back here. For example, we have our min.io, which is our object storage, right, running. And if we go, for example, here, let's just say localhost 9.1, just like this, and let's use here our credentials. So remember, you can get the credentials. What? It should be admin, okay? Admin, just like this. So guys, you can get the credentials if you are paying attention, okay? The credentials are here. So let's take a look here. So this is the files that we have, okay? We have this file that starts with 2025. If we go here on our place that we are going to download the files, okay, we will see that we are filtering, okay? So we are just going to download files that start with 2025. And so here we have the file. And if we take a look here, the file, let's just download file. So this is the file, okay, that we are going to download. As I was telling you guys, we have in this file the header. I think this is not the best representation to see the file. Yes, so this is the file, okay. The file is very simple. We have some records, of course. We could add more, okay, and upload, okay. I think we can do that. So let's just add more lines. So we can have a file bigger than that. But anyways, so as we can see, we have a header of the file. And if we go here on our reader, what we have done here. So let's go here in the header. We are skipping the first line. So we are skipping the first line because, yes, because the first line, okay, is an header. Now, let's go back to our IntelliJ. Now, let's run our application. Let's see. Okay, unmapped target ID. Okay, so my bad, guys. The first thing that we need to do, as we are using the Lombok, right, is to compile our application. So let's just open here on our terminal. So here on our terminal, let's just use maven clean compile in order to compile, okay? So now, okay, I'm mapped ID. Okay, yeah. I think it should be, okay, a mapped source. It should be a mapped source here. Yeah, just like that. So now let's compile once again. Yes, so here we have, and now if we take a look here, what, god damn it, this IntelliJ never works when I want. Okay, so let's just see here on the generated source classes. Let's see on our mapper, okay, the map struct just create the boilerplate code for us. So now that we have everything like this, let's go back here on our job, right, on our job, and let's run the application. Now let's run the application. Okay, we have here an exception. Okay, so it cannot. Okay. Okay, we need also another property which will be Spring, I think Spring Cloud that AWS that S3 allow, no, path, yes, just like this. So Spring Cloud AWS path style access enable. Now let's try once again our application. Okay, yes, now we got an error, so we just need to fix. Now everything is working. We have just the flat file parse exception, parsing error at line 2. Okay, so here we can see we have okay, so it's just a flat file error, so we just need to incorrect number of tokens 6 7. Okay, so we just need to inspect here, so just like this. So here we have 1 2 3 4 5 6. Okay, seven. Okay, yeah, something is not right. Location, country, so sale ID, customer ID, sales date and amount. So just going back here, so if we compare, we need the product ID, yes, so we need the product ID. So let's just go here. Before this we have the product ID. Okay, now let's run our application, format the code, and now let's see. No, okay, cannot access the column sale date, sales date. So let's just see here, sale date. Okay, but it's on, so we just need also to fix my mistake, guys. Should be sale date. So just like that. Now I think it's gonna work. Now work, don't play with me. Oh, amazing. Now let's take a look at logs. So what we have here in our logs, so our application started, right? So the name of our job is sync sales job. Then the first step was downloading the file. So when we download the file is so small, that's the reason that we are not we cannot see the all progress. Okay, but as we can see here, when we specified, for example, here on our S3, okay, so so here we added the listener, so the logging transfer listener. So the logging transfer listener is telling us the progress, okay, of our let's say download of our transfer using the CRT and the transfer manager of S3. That's amazing, guys. For example, if we had a very large, okay, we could see the progress. and that's amazing. I think we can try, but let me explain first. Then, so as we can see here, we logged, right? File downloaded successfully from bucket, as we can see here, file, blah, 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 download successfully. And then the logging transfer listener told us, okay, it's just logging here, the transfer complete. So after the transfer complete, so we have already our file using the multipart. Guys, remember we are transferring using the multipart download, okay? So after that, after finishing this step, okay, which is a tasklet step, then we start, for example, processing the file that we have just downloaded, and we are going to persist it in database. Okay, so this is what he's telling us. So the download file step finished successfully, then it starts executing the file downloaded to DB, right? We are getting the file, processing the content and saving it or persisting it into our database. And then it just say that, okay, everything finished. And now if we just refresh here, let me just refresh. So we can just go here and yeah. So let's, yeah, we have here. Yes, so here is the table. All right, now we have. So yes, we have here the Spring Batch job repository, right, the metadata. And now let's just click here and we will see, okay, we have persisted everything that we have downloaded, okay, from our file to DB. As we can see, okay, so the country, Portugal, location Setúbal, which is the city, other country Angola, the city is Rwanda, Nigeria, England, China, Russia, Ukraine, Kenya, India, Brazil, and so on. Now guys, now that we understand, let me just go and create a very large file, I think, because I want to see the progress in action. So in that order, let me just go and let's create the file. So I have just created a file, the maximum is 127 megabytes. So now let's run our application, okay, in order to see here how it will work in terms of, let's say, multi-part downloading. All right, amazing guys, amazing. Now, as you can see, we are just using the correct file, the correct CRT and S3 transfer manager. And as we can see here, the log is showing us the progress of our, let's say, transfer. In this case, download. So guys, yeah, that's amazing. So at this time, so I have just restarted the application. So at this time, of course, we are executing, right? We are executing this second step. And as we have too many lines in our file, if you remember guys, when we download the file, at this point, when we download the file will be here. So if we take a look here, the file is actually very large. Even my IntelliJ want to crash. So don't do that. I want to go to the last one. Oh, okay. Data. So if we take a look here, this CSV file, it's not the end of the file, but if we go, for example, here, I have the Sublime text. So let me just put it like this. Yeah, so for example, if I open the file using Sublime text, which is amazing for text, we will see, okay, that the file now is a bit bigger. We have too many records, and yeah, so when we download, right, so when we download the file will be here. If we go here on our database, whoa, that's too much. Let me use here the query. Let me just count. Okay, we need the from. Select count. Yes, so now we have of course guys, as we can see, oh guys, my bad. First thing that we need to understand, the chunk size is very small. Chunk size is very small, guys. For this particular case now, we can put, for example, the chunk size, the chunk size of, let's say 2000, I think is okay. And of course, also we need to think better. If we want better performance when we are dealing with too many records, okay, or lines, JPA item writer maybe is not the best solution. So guys, I hope that you are enjoying this video, guys. Now let's go to our presentation in order to understand the benefits of this and so on. But leave a like, guys. Why you are not, man, you are here. Leave a like now. I'm waiting for you. Now leave a like. Yeah. What's up, bro? Leave a like. Okay, thank you. Now let's go. So guys, now going back here, so in terms of memory usage optimization in S3 Transfer Manager, which is the one that we are using in our application, we can understand that, for example, I took this image from the AWS official documentation, okay, related to S3. So as we can see here, we are talking about the AWS Lambda cold start duration, using, for example, the S3, the existing S3 async client, which is the one that many people are using in production, against CRT based S3 client. And we can see here the difference is notorious when we talk about the cold start duration. So if you understand, cold start is just the initial startup delay, okay? So the cold start duration, as we can see here, the cold start duration decreases as memory size increases for both of them, okay? So for example, starting here from 512 megabyte to 2 gigabytes. What I'm trying to tell you guys is, for example, if we take a look here at 2048 megabytes, okay, the existing client is under, as we can see here, the existing client is under 3 seconds, which is amazing, okay? While CRT, right? CRT is under 1 second. Okay, this is amazing. So using, for example, CRT based S3 client significantly reduces AWS cold start times, okay, especially for lower memory size, which can lead, for example, for faster function initialization and potentially lower latency for your application. Going back to our topic, which is multi-part upload. So why we need multi-part upload or multi-part download? Apart of that, we have single part upload and download. This is the traditional approach, which loads an entire file into memory. So in terms of memory footprint, the program loads a lot of data into RAM all at once. Can we imagine if you are dealing, for example, with large file? So when you upload a file, your application client, which can be AWS SDK, has to read the object somewhere, right? By default, many simple examples load the entire file into memory RAM before sending it to S3. So for example, for small files, this can be fine. But if you try to upload or download let's say a large object first by reading it completely into a single in-memory buffer, you can easily exhaust your process heap. So what I'm trying to tell you guys here is, for example, in terms of memory consumption, you will first load the entire file into memory, for example, okay, and the memory usage is equal the file size. Can you understand, guys? And there is no memory optimization. And for example, you can also cause out of memory error for large files. Now, when we talk about multi-part, okay, when we talk about the multi-part upload, which for example, we break the large file into small chunks, we will have amazing memory consumption because we can configure, okay, each part size. By default, it's 8 megabytes. So let's just go here, for example, in our code, we will see that default is 8 megabytes for each part, okay, of our large file. So going here on our application, for example, if we try to find, for example, here 8, okay, we will see that the minimum part size in bytes, okay, is 8. Okay, so it's 8 megabytes. That's what I'm trying to tell you guys. So as we can see, the default size of a part, when we are talking about the multi-part upload or download, okay, the default size of each part is 8 megabyte. And here is amazing in terms of memory consumption, because the memory usage will be the part size, okay, times the number of concurrent transfers. This is amazing. So the multi-part upload or download is efficient in terms of buffer management. And also we can have more control of memory footprint. In terms of reliability, we can understand, for example, in terms of single part download, okay, when it fails, we have here a single point of failure, okay, and if it fails, there is no automatic retry mechanism, okay, and the entire operation must be retried. So there is no partial success handling, okay, and also the network issues can affect entire operation. But when we talk about the multi-part upload, okay, we can understand that we have automatic retry for failed part, we have the partial success handling, we have the resume capability, we have better error handling, network resilience, and also we have the parallel connection, better bandwidth utilization, reduced latency, and automatic retry with exponential backoff, and so on, guys. So this is what I think that is more important to understand. Let's try always to use multi-part upload or download, okay? It's not overkill. We can leave it as our default. For example, in my case, I just say, okay, so let's just leave it as, let's say, as our standard, okay? Our standard is using multi-part upload and download with S3, okay, CRT based client, using S3 Transfer Manager. So this is the stack that we are using in terms of dealing with S3 bucket. So guys, I really hope that you enjoyed this video. Please leave a like, subscribe, leave a comment. So now let's go to the next video, and bye bye.